Hi, I'm Kathy Moore, and this is Steps in a Journey. This is a class on the spiritual life as we all journey together to the eternal life. We've been reading Confessions, and it's all about St. Monica right now that we've been reading. And she and Augustine had a wonderful talk together. And she said, all of her dreams, her prayers were answered even higher than she'd ever even dreamed of them being answered. And this is often happens when you lift up your heart to God. Now, she prayed for a long time, many years, but did not give up in praying for the conversion of her son, Augustine. And now he not only was converted back to the Catholic faith that he grew up in which he had left, like a lot of our children do, as they get set out in the world, and he rejected the faith of his mother and took up the faith of his agnostic faith of his father. And he also believed in the Manichaean religion. And now, as he thought, we've been reading throughout the book on how he found fault with the Manichaean religion. And then, step by step by step, which is the way the Lord takes us, he gradually accepted the truths of the Catholic faith. And then, on the last step, he's reading and hearing about his friends who just read a small book on St. Anthony of the Desert. And it's a very small book that we can all read now, thanks to modern communication in which all these saints' books are now published for people. And he heard how men who strolled in the garden found this book and began reading it, and they were converted right then and there. They said, this is the truth. And they met with their other friends, and they said, we are going to go, we're quitting our employment, and we are going to follow this Jesus. And the others also said, well, we aren't going to quit our employment, but we are going to follow Jesus too. And so one of these men came and told Augustine this story. And Augustine thought, here I've been searching for so many years and cannot accept Jesus. And yet these men just read a simple story and accepted it immediately. And he began to think of all the women and widows that remained chaste after their marriage. And he says, why can't I be chaste? He says, I want a woman too bad. Lord, help me. I want to believe, but I can't. How can I cross over into this threshold? And his mind was so confused that he left the garden. And he left his friend standing there. And he went into the garden to think by himself. And Lord, what is this? Why am I so confused? Why can't I have the strength to follow you and to choose you? And into his mind came the thought that, did you think these people didn't have help? They had help, but from the Lord to be strong and chaste and pure in their lives. And then he said, Lord, help me. Help me. And then he heard a child with a sing-song voice, take up and read. Take up and read. And he says, that's a funny saying. I never heard that song before, that nursery, that rhyme that that child is saying. And so he rushed into his friend and picked up a work of Paul. That's what he had. He had a book of St. Paul laying on the table, and he picked up that, and where he opened it up to is give up all and follow me. And so he did. He gave up everything. First of all, we were reading on how he had to give up his teaching. And he taught rhetoric. And he said, fortunately, vacation was coming up in 2 weeks. And he thought, should I just quit now before vacation time? And he says, no, he'll finish the 2 weeks and then quit, which he did. And he could completely. He says, I'm not going to teach rhetoric so that young men can learn to argue the faith. I'm going to just teach the faith to everybody. And so he gave up his whole everything, his career and everything, to follow Jesus. And Monica was saying in this conversation, oh, my prayers were answered. You not only accepted the faith, and he could have kept on teaching and lived his faith, but he gave up that as well. And she didn't know that he would shortly become a priest and a bishop. But she just knew that he had given up everything, all worldly desires, everything for worldly glory, worldly finances. He gave it all up to follow the Lord. And she said, my God has done this for me most abundantly, and that I now see you despising earthly happiness to become his servant. So why do I linger? And that was the end of chapter 10. Why do I linger, Monica asked the Lord. Why? My greatest desires, my greatest prayer has been answered. So why am I lingering here on earth now? What more do you want of me, Lord? Why do I linger? And many of us, I'm getting older, and a lot of my friends are a lot older than me, and we're all thinking of that. Why, Lord, what else do you want us to do on this earth? And he's keeping us here for a reason. He has plans for each one of us. And we're, most of us that I'm filming this for Zoom, most of us have taken the healing ministry classes, in which we have been taught to pray with others with more assurance directly for them, not only from afar, but face to face, because we believe in the power of prayer, and we believe in answered prayer. And so we might not be in active ministry, and maybe we are still yet, but our prayers are so strong and so powerful. And we know that. We know God is right here with us. He loves us, and he will answer our prayers. And so now we'll pick up in book 9, chapter 11. And this is Augustine continuing from after Monica says, why do I linger? And he said, what answer I made her, I do not remember. It was scarcely 5 days, however, not much more. Then she fell sick with a fever. In that illness, one day, she fainted and was unconscious for a while. We hurried to her, but she was soon brought back to her senses, and looking at me and my brother standing there, asked us, where was I? Then, looking fixedly at us, speechless in our grief, she said, you shall bury your mother here. I held my peace and kept myself from weeping, but my brother said something, wishing for her as a happier lot that she might die in her own land, not in a strange place. At this, with an anxious look, she restrained him with her eyes, because he was still concerned about such things. And looking at me said, see how he talks? Then she said to us both, lay this body anywhere. Do not let the care for that trouble you in any way. My only request is this: remember me at the Lord's altar wherever you are." Having expressed this wish in such words as she could, she fell silent, being in great pain with her increasing sickness. But I rejoiced, considering your gifts, Lord, your gifts unseen, which you pour into the hearts of your faithful ones, from whence wondrous fruits spring up. I gave thanks to you, remembering what I had known before, how careful and anxious she had always been to the place of her burial. She had provided and prepared such a place for herself by the body of her husband. Because they had lived in great harmony together, she wished, so little can the human mind embrace divine things, to have this addition to that happiness, and to have it remembered among men that after her pilgrimage beyond the seas, that which was earthly of this united pair would be united beneath the same earth. I did not know when this vain desire began to diminish in her through the fullness of your goodness, but I rejoice that it was so. Indeed, in our conversation by the window when she said, "What am I doing here any longer?" there appeared no desire of dying in her own country. I heard afterward, too, that while we were at Ostia, in my absence, one day she was talking with some of my friends about her contempt of this life and the blessings of death. And they were amazed at such courage which you had given to a woman. When they asked whether she were not afraid to leave her body so far from her own city, she replied, "Nothing is far to God. I do not fear that at the end of the world he should fail to know whence to raise me up." On the 9th day of her illness, in the 56th year of her age, and in the 33rd of mine, that devout and holy soul was set free from her body. Book 9, Chapter 12. I closed her eyes, and a mighty sorrow flooded my heart, overflowing into tears. My eyes, at the same time, by the violent command of my mind, drank up their fountain wholly dry, and woe was me in such a strife. But when she breathed her last, the boy Adodatus burst into loud lamentations. But then, checked by us all, he held his peace. In the same way, a childish feeling in me, seeking its outlet in weeping, was checked and silenced. For we thought it was not fitting to solemnize that funeral with tearful laments and groanings, as though she were unhappy and were altogether dead, when in fact she was neither unhappy in her death or altogether dead. Of this we were assured on good grounds, the testimony of her good life and her unfeigned faith. What was it then which grievously pained me within, but a fresh wound wrought through the sudden tearing apart of our most pleasant and cherished habit of being together. I rejoice indeed in one testimony during her last sickness when, mixing her endearments with my acts of duty, she called me dutiful, and remarked with great affection that she had never heard any harsh or reproachful sound uttered in my mouth against her. But yet, O God, what comparison is there between the honor I paid her and her services to me? Deprived of such comfort in her, my soul was wounded, and the life torn apart, as it were, hers and mine, which had been made but one. After the boy had been restrained from weeping, Euodias took up the psalter and began to sing the psalm, "I will sing of mercy and judgment to you." And the whole household joined in. Hearing what we were doing, many of the brethren and pious women came together, and while they whose office it was made the body ready for burial according to custom, I stayed in another part of the house with those who thought it was not right to leave me, talking about something appropriate at the time. By this balm of truth, my torment, known to you, was assuaged, which they, listened attentively, did not realize was there, thinking me to be without all feeling of sorrow. But before you, where none of them could hear, I blame the weakness of my feelings and stopped my flood of grief a little. But it rose again like a tide, yet not so as to make me burst out in tears or change my facial expression. Still, I knew what I was keeping down in my heart. But being very unhappy that these human feelings had such power over me, which in due course and appointment of our natural condition must needs happen, I grieved with new grief for my grief, and was worn down by this double sorrow. When the body was carried to the burial, we went and returned without tears. I did not weep during those prayers which we poured forth to you, when the sacrifice of our redemption was offered for her, as her body was placed by the grave, as accustomed there, before it was actually buried. So it was a custom at that time to have Mass right there at the cemetery before the body was buried. Yet the whole day I was secretly very sad, and I prayed to you with a troubled mind as best I could to heal my sorrow. Yet you did not. I believe you were impressing on my memory by this one instance how strong the bond of all habit is, even on a soul that which now feeds upon the word without deception. It also seemed good to me to go and bathe, having heard that the bath had its name, balneum, from the Greek balenium, because it drives sadness from the mind. And this also I confess to your mercy, Father of the fatherless, that I bathed and was the same as before. for the bitterness of sorrow could not be assuaged by bathing. But when I slept and woke up again, I found my grief not a little softened. And as I lay alone on my bed, I remembered those true verses of Ambrose. Truly you are God, the creator of all, and ruler of the height, who clothing day in light, gives slumber in the night. When our limbs new vigor gain, from rest new labors to sustain, our minds are eased of weary grief, and anxious hearts find their relief. And then, little by little, I recovered my former thoughts of your handmaid, her holy manner of life toward you, her holy tenderness and care toward us, of which I was suddenly deprived. And I found comfort in weeping in your sight for her and for myself, in her behalf and my own. And I gave way to the tears I had been holding back, refreshing my heart with them, and had found rest in them. For it was in your ears, not in those of men who would have interpreted my weeping scornfully. But now in writing, I confess it to you. Read it now, whoever will, and interpret it how he will. And if he finds sin in that I wept over my mother for a brief part of an hour, the mother who was dead and gone from me, who had wept for me for many years that I might live in your eyes, let him not deride me. Rather, if he be one of great charity, let him weep for my sins to you, the Father of all the family of your anointed one. Way back then it was unmanly to weep in public. And even today, I have heard people say, oh, that person, they put on such a scene that they're weeping at a funeral. And I'm always amazed at anyone who should think that. But I suppose it all depends on your family attitude and how you're raised, on whether you accept weeping at a funeral. Myself, when my good friend Sister Mary Matthew died, I did not weep. I did not weep at her funeral. She died in March. But you know, all December, every single day I cried almost all day long for her. That's when I wept for her. It wasn't right away. But I miss her terribly now, even more than right after she died. It's almost like, oh, she just went away for a little while to visit someone. She'll be back. But when it really sinks in that she's gone and no more, and that's when he wept. He knew that she was in a good place in heaven because of her good life. But he wept over missing her as part of his life. And that's a grief that we all have over a dear one, whether it's a mother, a father, a relative, or just an awfully good friend that we know will not hike with us anymore, will not chat with us anymore, will not pray with us anymore. That's when our grief just overwhelms us. So getting back to Confessions, Book 9, Chapter 13. Now that my heart is healed from that wound, restored again to its normal feeling, I pour out to you, our God, a far different kind of tears on behalf of your handmaid, flowing from a spirit broken by the thoughts, the dangers of every soul that dies in Adam. For although she had been quickened in Christ before her release